especially the recommendations and hierarchies that are born from the algorithms of platforms using personal data. And these dangers are not an anomaly, they're not a bug, they're not a momentary accident, they are the consequence of the economic model that aims to increase audience and therefore aims for reaction and therefore gives priority to emotion rather than reflection. The model is also open to being exploited in the absence of regulation by disinformation professionals. And this has many consequences. It can lead to a breach of trust towards institutions, towards elections, that can be manipulated by rumors and fake profiles created for that very purpose. And within that situation, there is a true threat that social media will lead to the disintegration of our societies. Left to themselves, their response is not up to scratch, and in fact there is no incitement to be so. Despite their resources, the platforms consecrate very few means to educating users, or a moderation which remains either inexistent or frequently questioned in majority languages. And there is a lot of inequality around the world, as we have noticed here at UNESCO. These bubble effects favor the expression of extremes and finally represent a barrier rather than a support to freedom of expression. We know that in history each information revolution, such as mass press in the 19th century, radio and television in the 20th century, have been accompanied by a rethinking and revolutionizing of frameworks for information so that information could serve the common good rather than private interests. And it is this work, this reflection on the principles of regulation that we have not begun today.
Dear friends, ensuring information as a public good in the digital age has been a major priority for UNESCO in recent years, in line with the Windhoek Plus 30 declaration adopted at our Global Press Freedom Conference in Namibia in 2021 and endorsed by all our member states. We, as you know, published a first set of principles for the transparency of platforms already 2 years ago. We've also scaled up our work to promote media and information literacy with a new curriculum updated to better respond to the challenges posed by digital platforms and algorithms. We are now supporting teacher training in this field of media and information literacy in 25 countries, and we're working to address shortcomings in content moderation with the project Social Media for Peace, a project supported by the European Union. In Kenya, Colombia, Indonesia, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, this initiative has shown how important it is to adapt moderation to local contexts, local sensitivities, in order to support peace. But while this work on the ground, adapted to local context, is essential, it is not enough. We also need guidelines to help shape the rules applicable to platforms themselves, and we need them now. Between now and the end of 2024, more than 90 elections will take place worldwide, and over 2 million people will be called on to cast their votes. We cannot allow these democratic processes to be swayed by dealers of disinformation, opening the door to all kinds of dangers. The regulatory work to ensure transparency, to protect democratic life is, of course, the responsibility first of states, and many of them are taking action, with at least 55 initiatives already underway. But if these regulatory initiatives are developed in isolation, with each country or region working in their own corner, they are not without risks. Information disruption is by definition a global problem, so our reflections must take place also at this scale, the right scale, the global scale, based upon common principles. Firstly, because digital giants have unrivaled international reach and technological prowess. We need our actions to be both consistent and coherent, and to ensure also that no country or region is left behind. And secondly, because regulating digital platforms is an urgent but also very delicate process if we want regulation to uphold rather than erode freedom of expression and human rights. If we do not think of solutions built around these rights, we leave the field open to dangerous incursions on freedoms. This conference has been organized so that this fundamental global discussion can take place. We are very happy that so many of you have responded to our call: government representatives, regulators, digital platforms, civil society. I would like to thank especially President Lula of Brazil and Prime Minister Jakobsdóttir of Iceland for their messages, which we will hear shortly. I also very much welcome the presence of special rapporteurs on freedom of expression from major intergovernmental organizations. We are here to listen to you, for we need all the voices, all the expertise, all the point of views, if we are to rise to this complex but essential challenge. UNESCO is proud to lead these discussions here, building on our universal vocation, our ability to gather all actors around a single table, and building on our long experience supporting cooperation and providing guidance for broadcasting regulators and press councils around the world. Together, we will continue this dialogue so that it can lead to appropriate guidelines on transparency, on accountability, and other principles. Then our goal will be to put them into practice, assisting our member states in this regard, just as we have done with communication and media laws for many decades now. And we will also continue to be a space for dialogue, including dialogue between regulators, to exchange best practices and to promote better international coordination, the necessity of which is all, I think, too clear today. Pour conclure,
as a conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, each of us has experienced the way in which these digital platforms has changed the way we interact with others. It is by fully understanding the technological revolution that we can ensure it does not go against human rights, freedom of expression and democracy, so that information remains a common good. And we must now together reflect and act. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very lively and fruitful discussions over these 2 days. Have a good conference.
Big thanks there to the Director General for her words there, underlining the sense of urgency in terms of regulating the internet, but also importantly maintaining freedom of expression. Well, it is my pleasure now to present to you a video that has been sent to you, as the Director General told us, from the Prime Minister of Iceland, and that is Katrín Jakobsdóttir.
Cher Audrey, distinguished audience, I am delighted to be with you here today virtually to address this very important issue. This issue is closely tied to the founding mandate of UNESCO to protect the free flow of information, both word and images, and for UNESCO to serve as a laboratory of ideas. Today, few things impact our minds more than the information we get through our digital devices, brought to us by algorithms. The huge changes we are seeing in how we get our information are neither the first or the last ones of their kind. When written language replaced spoken language, and when printing presses replaced manuscript writers, the power structures of societies were inevitably affected. The medium is the message has never been more relevant now when we are in the middle of the digital transformation. It presents great opportunities, both economically and in challenging fields such as environmental issues and in healthcare. The internet and social media have enabled people, both within local communities and across borders worldwide, to connect in a way we have not seen before. And this has often been a force for great positive change. These tools have given people a voice and agency, given marginalized groups ways to seek their rights, to get their issues on the political agenda. But at the same time, the internet and social media can be a dangerous place. Hate speech has driven people into despair, and online harassment has ruined lives. We also know that vulnerable people have been radicalized through internet communities. It's also been notable how women, including politicians and public figures, are targeted with threats and sexual harassment. Here, the goal clearly seems to be silence them and diminish their power. This is in line with tendencies we've seen before when traditional power structures change and a wider group gets influence. The backlash against these changes becomes real. We must always fight against such tendencies, safeguarding the progress we have made towards a more equal and just world. The online harassment and violence against journalists, not least women journalists, poses a threat to media freedom globally. Deliberate spread of false information in order to undermine democracy presents a grave danger to all of us. In the past couple of years, we have witnessed two of the world's largest democracies question the integrity of elections, risking the peaceful transition of power due to the spread of disinformation online. Algorithms can create large divides within communities, and this can create deeper discord in our public discourse, harm democratic processes, affect elections, and undermine the institutions we rely on to run our societies. Discussions such as the ones we are having now in Paris are immensely important, and I want to thank UNESCO for organizing this impressive multi-stakeholder gathering. This topic is one of the most important ones for the health of our societies and the future of international relations. It's important to figure out a common set of guidelines on how to regulate this digital space. Technology cannot be misused to suppress people, to survey or harass, or to shut down the internet. We need to ensure that new technologies serve the people, that they strengthen democratic processes and human rights, instead of undermining basic principles and values. And the impact of artificial intelligence on our societies is unquestionable and is a growing issue we must take seriously. And UNESCO's important human rights-based recommendation on the ethics of AI responds to that reality. If these innovative technologies are to increase our common good, we need to ensure fair and equal accessibility. Accessibility of AI for indigenous and small language groups can be critical for their future viability. In Iceland, we face this challenge, and it has been a priority of my government to make sure that new technologies are and will be available in Icelandic, the language on which our cultural heritage is founded and we use to communicate. We need to make the digital space a safe space for our children. And this is an integral part of the media legislation we are preparing to propose in Iceland, and the guidelines we are discussing here will be an important part of the upcoming debate in Iceland on this legislation. Moreover, we've been doing comprehensive work on how to counter hate speech, and I will present a resolution to the Icelandic Parliament on that shortly. The work of UNESCO and the UN and these guidelines will be useful in that discussion. We are also working on ways to counter the spread of disinformation during electoral periods. For this, the guidelines will also be useful. Dear guests, Iceland currently holds the chairmanship of the Council of Europe, the key institution for democracy, human rights, and rule of law in 46 countries. Our goal is to use this chairmanship to advance human rights, and as the Council of Europe is a leading organization on media freedom, we will facilitate the debate on these guidelines there as well. Cher Audrey.
Dear Audrey, thank you for your leadership on this issue. I wish you all good luck in taking on this extremely difficult challenge, and my government and I look forward to working with you to promote peace in the minds of men and women worldwide. Thank you.
An important message there from the Prime Minister of Ireland, highlighting the importance, obviously, of the digital space, but also its potential for discord, for division, making it dangerous for our children, for us today. Now, the President of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, also wanted to express his support for the work of this conference, and he's done so via a written message. The message will be read out by João Brandt, who is the Secretary of Digital Policies at the Communications Secretariat at the Presidency of the Republic of Brazil. I'd like to now welcome him to the stage.
Your Excellency, Ms. Audrey Azoulay, Director General of UNESCO, Your Excellency, Ambassador Santiago Mourão, Permanent Delegate of Brazil to UNESCO, and President of the 41st General Conference of UNESCO, Your Excellency, Ambassador Tamara Siamashvili, Permanent Delegate of the Republic of Serbia to UNESCO, and Chairperson of the Executive Board of UNESCO. Your Excellency, Minister Luiz Roberto Barroso of the Supreme Federal Court of Brazil, Ms. Maria Ressa, CEO of Rappler and Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Your Excellency, Ms. Director General, I would like to thank you for the invitation to attend this global conference by UNESCO held in Paris between the 22nd and 23rd of February 2023. Digital platforms in their different modalities are a fundamental part of our day-to-day lives. They define the way we communicate, how we relate to other people, and consume products and services. The development of the internet has brought extraordinary accomplishments to the global economy and to our societies. Digital platforms have helped to promote and disseminate knowledge. They facilitate trade, they increase productivity, they broaden the offer of services and the flow of information. These benefits, nevertheless, are distributed in an unequal manner between people of different levels of income, broadening social inequality. The digital environment caused the concentration of markets and power in the hands of few companies and countries. It has also caused risks to democracy, risks to the civilized interaction between people, risks to public health. The dissemination of disinformation during the COVID-19 pandemic contributed to thousands of deaths. Hate speech makes victims every day, and the victimized are the most vulnerable sectors of our societies. The world has witnessed the attack by extremists to the seats of the executive, legislative and judiciary branches of power in Brazil on January 8th. Brazilian democracy won that battle, and it's now stronger. But we'll always be indignant with the barbaric scenes of that Sunday. What happened that day was the culmination of a campaign initiated much before and that used as ammunition lies and disinformation. This campaign had as targets democracy and the credibility of Brazilian institutions. To a large extent, this campaign was nurtured, organized, and disseminated through several digital platforms and messaging apps. It used the same method used to generate acts of violence elsewhere in the world. These must stop. The international community needs from now on to work to give effective answers to these challenging questions of our times. We need balance. On the one hand, it's necessary to guarantee the exercise of individual freedom of expression, a fundamental human right. On the other hand, we need to ensure a collective right, the right of society to have access to trustworthy information and not lies and disinformation. We also cannot allow the integrity of our democracies to be affected by decisions taken by some few actors that currently control the digital platforms. Regulation should guarantee the exercise of individual and collective rights. It should correct distortions of a business model that generate profits exploiting the personal data of users. To be more efficient, digital platform regulation should be designed with transparency and social participation. In the international field, this matter should be coordinated in a multilateral manner. The debating process spearheaded by UNESCO, I'm sure, will be useful in the construction of a plural and transparent dialogue, a process that will involve governments, experts, and the civil society. Concurrently, we should work to reduce digital gaps and promote the autonomy of developing countries in the digital realm. We need to guarantee access to the internet for all, stimulate education, and the necessary skills for an active and conscious participation of our citizens in the digital world. Developing countries should be capable of acting in a sovereign manner in the data economy as agents and not only as exporters or passive content consumers. This UNESCO conference is the beginning of this debate and not its final stop. I'm sure that Brazil will be able to contribute in a significant manner to the construction of a fairer and more balanced digital environment based in transparent and democratic governance structures. I take this opportunity to renew my assurance of our highest esteem and consideration. Signed by Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, President of the Federative Republic of Brazil. Thank you.
I'm now going to quote the 2021 Nobel Peace Prize laureate. And you know what? It's a bit awkward because she's in the room, so I better not mess it up. But that is Maria Ressa, and we're going to hear from Maria Ressa in just a few moments. But she said, without facts, you can't have trust. And without trust, we have no shared reality, no democracy, and it becomes impossible to deal with our world's existential problems. Well, Maria Ressa is CEO of the news site Rappler, and as I said, the 2021 laureate, Peace Prize laureate, but also the UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Prize. She herself has been the target of online attacks and disinformation and has become one of the world's most authoritative voices on the subject. Her presence and her informed opinions are absolutely indispensable, and it is my pleasure to welcome her to the podium.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much from Brazil. to Iceland, to Audrey Azoulay here in UNESCO. It is so wonderful to be here. And the first thing I have to say is to so many people in the audience, thank you so much for all your work over the last few years. I don't think I'd be standing in front of you without your support. To UNESCO, to the Hold the Line Coalition, to so many friends here. But here's the thing. There are so many more like me, so many more who struggle every day just to do their jobs. The quote, without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these three, we have no shared reality. We cannot solve any problem. We have no democracy. That's evidence-based, data-based. So I will quickly show it to you, and then I hope this will help power our discussions in the next 2 days. I've been up front in the Nobel lecture. I said, it's time to reform or revoke Section 230. And that is because impunity must stop. Let me take this apart, right? Please pull up. It is a battle for facts. But let's start with the data. Justice Brandeis said, the way to fight hate speech is with more speech. No longer. It's a different world. It's like we're speaking a different language. This is data. This is algorithms. You heard this from Audrey's speech today, right? But think about it like this. How did we go from the world we knew to the world where we are today? It's going from an Excel sheet of data to big data. It's going from thinking through one word at a time to AI, to natural language processing, GPT-3 that takes every word and punches 1.7 billion permutations of what the next word can be. It is a very, very different world where free speech is used to pound free speech. This I know in person. 90 hate messages per hour meant to stop me from doing my job. So that change of scale, right? Here's that, let me just summarize all of this. And I apologize to folks at UNESCO who have seen this 10 million times, because I keep saying I feel like Cassandra and Sisyphus combined since 2016. New gatekeepers, from journalists to technology, from news organizations which are held accountable. You can hold us accountable. We are transparent. We make a mistake, we correct it. To technology, which is in the dark. What principles guide it? Let me quickly tell you what those principles are. So the very first thing in 2014 was just when we saw it, content was separated from distribution. That's a big shift, because now you can do the best journalism, you can have the best content. NGOs, UNESCO, the UN considered one of those, won't get us wide distribution as an influencer. I mean, you'll hear it in the panel, right? And why? Because let's talk values. The UN was set up with these principles, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we signed to. But what if this is the value today? You go to your kid and say, hey, lie, I'll reward you. Lie all the time, I'll keep rewarding you. That's the fundamental design of the social media platforms that now connect all of us. Why? It's embedded in a model that we now call a business model called surveillance capitalism. We didn't get that name until 2019 from Shoshana Zuboff. And why lies? Why do lies spread faster? The second one, MIT study from 2018, we felt it in 2016 in the Philippines. For some reason, facts are really boring. And the lies, especially when laced with fear, with anger, with hate, with tribalism, us against them, they spread. It's like throwing a lit match into kindling. That's a fact. Lies spread faster than facts. So if you raise your family telling them to lie, what kind of people do they become? Pull it out, right? That's the incentive structure. When that is the beginning of our incentive structure, we live in the upside down. I always go to Stranger Things, you know, the upside down. This is where we are. It's yucky, covered with yuck, deceptively familiar. But you know, we have to somehow turn it right side up. In your hands, turn it right side up. Because our communication systems today are insidiously manipulating us. It is a behavior modification system. This term, A/B testing. Imagine if a drug company came in and said, hey, you're A. Let's test drug A. You, drug B. Oh, drug A, you guys died, sorry. That's what's happening to our minds, to our emotions, because the greatest problem we face, and a biologist actually said this, E.O. Wilson, he said, the greatest crisis we face are our Paleolithic emotions, our medieval institutions, and our godlike technology. Very, very different, right? So what kinds of things do we put into a law? Because in the end, the way we deal with this is in long-term education, medium-term legislation. Short-term, we're defenseless. It is just us, and I'll show you how we can handle it. But all of these things come into play. Data privacy, antitrust, user safety, and content moderation is the end of the cascading failure. At dinner the other night, I was saying, you know, when we focus only on content moderation, it's like there's a polluted river, and we take a glass, we scoop out the water, we clean up the water, and then dump it back in the river. What we have to do is go all the way to the factory polluting the river, shut it down, and then resuscitate the river. Right? That's the challenge in front of us. I'll show you from my experience, and I apologize to those who have seen this. In 2016, we came out with a Weaponization of the Internet series. We showed how 26 fake accounts can influence up to 3 million others. It's cheap, it's easy, and the incentive structure is lies. Lies spread at least 6 times faster than really boring facts. I feel sorry for anyone in government. I feel sorry for any woman in the public sphere. In the Philippines in 2017, women were attacked at least 10 times more than men. And the end goal, well, here's what happened to me in 2016, 90 hate messages per hour. But it wasn't quantified until I began to get pummeled with things like, what they do is they look for your weaknesses. So what we did, our only defense, it's a blessing and a curse when you get targeted because you see all the attacks. So we gathered the data. This is the first network in 2017 that attacked me, attacked opposition politicians, attacked women. And it was so systematic, it was broken down by demographics. What attacks did I get? Things like this, my gender, my color, anything that will make you ashamed, right? Fearful, because the goal is to make you opt out. And then when I didn't, then it came out like this. This is the day I was convicted. I'm still going strong. I still believe that we're going to win these cases, but you can see here what they do, because if they can't win with exponential lies bottom up, they come top down with the same lies. That's if they still can't win, the weaponization of social media, the weaponization of the law, then they look for your weakest points. For me, I have dry skin. You know, this is my 37th year as a journalist, so for some reason, they started doing this. They kept a code word, scrotum face. My skin is better than that, you know. But this is dehumanization, and it isn't just happening to me. The end goal of things like this leads to real-world violence. Online violence is real-world violence. So it took months for Facebook to take this stuff out. And then they did things like this. Every time there's an award or there's a film or there's anything, the Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Prize, I got pummeled for that. They made my skin look worse, and then they're kind of funny. Scrotum face gets added on. And then if the social media platforms begin to take this out, they're still there, but when they take it out, they then code word it, right? This isn't just happening to me. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Nietzsche was right. UNESCO in 2021, thank you, along with the International Center for Journalists, came out with this. A study, Julie Passetti did the chilling global trends in online violence against women journalists. The first time outside of Rappler where we began to see data and stats. 73% of women journalists have been attacked. And move it beyond women journalists. Women researchers are opting out, especially those working on disinformation. Women politicians are opting out precisely because they get attacked, right? Of the 73%, 25% received threats of physical violence, and of that, 20% have turned into real-world violence, right? Attacked or abused offline. But here's the thing, for me, at least in this one, ICFJ and UNESCO took almost 500,000 attacks, and they went through. What were the goals? 60% were meant to tear down my credibility. Thank you, thanks to you, it didn't work. But there are many Filipinos who believe it. So these are some of the things that wind up happening when you're trying to do your job. The other 40% was meant to tear down my spirit. It didn't work either. It's like waving a red flag for a bull, in front of a bull for me. But again, if you look at forbidden stories, the attacks on women are off the scale. It is sending, if you were vulnerable before, LGBTQ+, women, these are attacked even more. Okay, so I still don't have, okay, I have 2 minutes. So this is the last part, right? Like information warfare. That's not even in a lot of the documents we come out with. And yet, geopolitical power is exploiting this. They can go from, forget the nation states, they go to the cellular level, to the weaknesses of our biology, to your fears, and they crack it open. This is why Black Lives Matter in the United States was attacked on both sides in 2016, and the goal was not to make you believe one thing, it was to tear it apart. It was to make you distrust everything. Because if you can't trust, you can't move. There's 3 layers: personal, that's psychological. The second layer is sociological, groups behave differently. The third layer is the part that there's not much study done on this. It is actually our evolution, right? When our brains are literally being rewired, when we are pumped full of dopamine. There are studies that are out now that show this. When toxic sludge pumps through each of us to keep us scrolling, making a lot of money for the tech companies, but tearing down any sense of meaning for this high school generation today, for Gen Z, right? Think about the impact on your kids. And finally, the last one, going back to what Audrey said. She said there are at least 90 elections up to 2024. 2024, I always say it's the last 2 minutes of democracy, because there will be a tipping point. What's happened when the information ecosystem's incentive structure rewards the lies, rewards anger, fear, us against them, is that you wind up electing illiberal leaders democratically, they crumble institutions from within, and they don't stay in their own countries. They ally together. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, set up by China and Russia, last year brought in Iran, Myanmar, Turkey, tech and economics, right? So the last part is, how can you have integrity of elections if you don't have integrity of facts? That's the geopolitical shift we're in. So the last chunk is, please, don't just think about Russia invading Ukraine. Please think about that too, though. But that's conventional warfare. In the Nobel lecture, I said, this is an individual battle for facts, for integrity, for values. It is up to you, each of us on social media. Don't get lost in this. Stand up, draw the line, where on this side you're good, and this side you're evil. It's that clear. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is very clear. I'll end it with this. This is what we did in the Philippines, because I don't want to leave you depressed. There's a solution. First, find the right solution legislatively, because we are not protected. There are no building codes. Right now, I know we're in a building that followed building codes. We are not protected. There's no consumer protection. There is no protection of people on this technology. And it is going to get worse. So what we did is, if it's education long-term, legislation medium-term, please move faster. Short-term, it is just us. And so what we did in the Philippines is this whole of society approach with a data pipeline. And you just, I'm running out of time. I've had my 2 minutes. So I want to, please, 4 layers, right? News, fact-checking, they're really boring. Fact checks. The second layer is the mesh. Civil society groups, NGOs, human rights activists, businesses, church, whose task was to share those boring fact checks and add emotion. And we found that inspiration spreads as fast as anger. Inspiration. You are all leaders here. Finally, the third is the research groups, those poor researchers who keep telling us how we are being insidiously manipulated. And the last group is the law. How can you have rule of law if you don't have facts? And our lawyers who were part of this group in the Philippines were the most energized, because those journalists at the bottom, the first layer, we were exhausted. So this is it. That data pipeline gave us the information. I'll leave it with this to just say today, I put all of this in this book that came out, but it's now been translated into many different languages. And today, it is out in French. It's there. The question to each of you, what will you sacrifice for the truth? Think about it. This is the moment. This matters. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Maria. As you can hear that applause, you can see how much your words were appreciated. I now have an apology to make, and I'm very sorry because I think of all things I've been guilty of spreading disinformation. My mouth betrayed me, and I think instead of saying the Prime Minister of Iceland, I said the Prime Minister of Ireland. Clearly, Katrín Jakobsdóttir is the Prime Minister of Iceland. It is my great pleasure, though, now to move straight on from that and give the floor to Mr. Taufik Julassi. Now, he is the Assistant Director General of Communication and Information at UNESCO, and he is going to explain the overall objective of the consultation.
what an impossible task to try to speak after Maria Ressa. I told Melissa Fleming that I would prefer to give my 3 minutes to Maria to continue sharing with us her reflections, her wisdom, and her personal journey. But now I warn you, are changing styles. This is the UN, the UNESCO style, to read the speech prepared by my team. So please bear with me. Here it goes. Excellencies, let me try again. Excellency, President of the General Conference of UNESCO, Excellency, Madam President of the Executive Board, Excellencies, Ambassadors, Permanent Delegates, distinguished guests, representatives of the civil society organizations, of the technology companies, esteemed speakers, ladies and gentlemen. What an amazing start we had this morning. First with a poem, then with Madame Audrey Azoulay, Director General of UNESCO, and then obviously with Maria Ressa. I hope what you heard so far sets the scene for such complex issue that we are debating today and tomorrow, and obviously the potential impact that the guidelines to regulate digital platforms that UNESCO is trying to coordinate, to facilitate, could bring about positive change to cyberspace. It was said by many that what we would like to see these digital spaces become a place where information is a common public good and the information ceases to be a public hazard and a public harm. Clearly, the response to these questions is not simple. There isn't one size fits all. There isn't a single solution. And this is very much why we have used an inclusive multi-stakeholder approach, very much founded on international standards of human rights. This said, by convening this global dialogue, by coordinating this process of open consultations with all parties concerned, by taking the responsibility of drafting these guidelines, UNESCO would like to add a piece to this complex puzzle. UNESCO, in a humble way, would like to bring its brick to such construction. I will come back this afternoon with more details on why, what, and how underpinning this conference. Why UNESCO? What are we trying to do? And how we hope to operationalize these guidelines once they are finalized through this multi-stakeholder approach.
Let me now say a few words in French, ladies and gentlemen, in order to prepare the major gathering that we have here today and tomorrow. Since September, we have carried out very broad consultations with all players concerned by this complex and crucial issue for us all. And our aim is quite clear. It is to define global guidelines for the regulation of digital platforms in order to fight those harms that have been mentioned: disinformation, hate speech, online harassment, while, of course, doing our utmost to protect freedom of expression and human rights. The aim is not regulation for censorship, but regulation to ensure that information is the shared public good, while protecting online freedom of expression. The consultations that we've been carrying out over the past 6 months or so have led, a few weeks ago, to the publication of the second draft, document 2.0, for the regulation guidelines. That document was put up online a few weeks ago. The document and the guidelines in their current version called upon the responsibility of several players, governments, to set up independent regulatory bodies, independent from economic and political power, to ensure the respect for fundamental freedoms, the responsibility of digital platforms in terms of moderation of content with adequate investment in all regions of the world and in all languages of the world. Responsibility of platforms also to educate users as to the critical use of their tools.
In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, it is also important to underline the role of researchers, academia, and the technical community in providing their expertise to these discussions. Civil society, media professionals, and journalists should use these guidelines to hold all relevant players accountable and to actively participate in policy making in different jurisdictions in a truly multi-stakeholder manner. All these groups participated in this process, and we count on them to continue their engagement, their commitment, until we reach the final stage of the documentation. They sent us suggestions, comments, inputs, but also criticism, which we have been taking into account. We are here today and tomorrow for another open consultation with all of you to gain even a deeper understanding of the issues at hand to improve the process going forward. If we don't come together as an international community, we risk a political and jurisdictional fragmentation that will certainly jeopardize an internet founded on human rights, on openness, on accessibility, on multi-stakeholder governance. It is time to reboot the internet. It's time to build an internet of trust. Have a fruitful conference.
I'm now absolutely delighted to invite to the stage Carol Cadwalder, and she is an investigative journalist and features writer for The Guardian and Observer newspapers, and she is the moderator of our keynote and high-level panel discussion. She is going to be joined by Maria Ressa, who, as we heard, is a journalist, Nobel Prize laureate, and UNESCO Guillermo Cano Prize laureate, along with Melissa Fleming, who is the Undersecretary for Global Communications at the UN, and Felipe Neto, who is a communicator and a digital influencer from Brazil. Do join me in welcoming them.
I've just realised I'm in charge. That is a scary thought. Thank you so much, UNESCO, for hosting this. It really does feel like a landmark for me, I think, that the United Nations is bringing its focus and attention to these issues, issues which many of us here have been shouting about and trying to raise the alarm for many years. We are on the edge of a precipice, and we now know what the other side of that precipice looks like. We have seen it. It is violent insurrection and it is genocide. That's what lack of regulation looks like. we no longer have the luxury of ignorance. This panel is going to be I think the idea is it's a sort of general and broad-ranging sort of scene setter for the conference and why these issues matter. And, but I was told I had 3 minutes at the start, so I thought in those 3 minutes I would just go back very briefly to 2016, when I started looking into the issue of fake news. And at that time, we knew a fraction of what we know now. And I was trying to investigate the role of social media in the elections of 2016, and particularly the Brexit referendum, the vote that changed the face not just of Britain, but of Europe. And as a journalist, what I discovered is that I couldn't find out what happened, because this election had taken place almost overwhelmingly online, and all of the evidence had vanished. And in Britain, we have highly regulated elections. You have to register every leaflet. You have to account for every penny. And yet we had no idea who had seen what, who had placed those adverts, and who had paid for them. And the astonishing thing is that 7 years on, we still don't know. We still don't have that evidence. Facebook refused to hand it over to the British Parliament, and it's still refusing to. So I think all I will say is, over these 2 days, just bear in mind, you're going to hear from the platforms, you're going to hear many fine words, but we still have no means of accountability and no means actually of doing basic journalism. So I mention that actually because back in 2016, it felt like it was sort of this Orwellian nightmare I was being plunged into. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And at the end of 2017, I went into Parliament to give evidence. A committee had set up to start looking at these issues. And I just felt this overwhelming sense of relief that the grown-ups had turned up and were now looking at the issue. And I feel a similar emotion actually being here today. I feel a sense of relief. You are the grown-ups. And it is up to you, and I hope will be up to you, to bring about some change. So I just want to come on to this amazing panel. Maria, you've just heard from, with this astonishing keynote. I can't think of a better person to have here and to talk about these issues. She has been on the front line of this war of information and has taken a personal toll, as has her country, the Philippines.
Sorry, I just want to quickly, if you don't know Carol Cadwallader, of course, right, she was the Global North representative in the chilling. And what happened, because Carol wasn't really a tech reporter, she pulled a strand and began running after the woman who broke Cambridge Analytica. Team George is just kind of the latest version of that. But that took a huge toll on you, right? We can, so...
I know, look, Maria is so much cheerier on these subjects in that way, and I would love to ask you about that personal toll, Maria. I'll just introduce briefly, we have Felipe Neto here, I hope I pronounced that right, who's an extraordinary Brazilian YouTube creator and influencer and now spokesman, essentially, who has spoken out very loudly and prominently about Bolsonaro and the platform's role in inciting hate and violence. He has 44 million subscribers on YouTube, which I can't even get my head round. And we also have Melissa Fleming here, who is the UN, she's the Under-Secretary for Global Communications. And in her previous life, she was a journalist and author until you got a proper job, Melissa. So, but Maria, actually, I thought I'd start with you, and I had a different question in mind, but I think it was so powerful, your presentation, and this terrible, demeaning vilification that you got online. And I just thought it'd be helpful if you could describe how that's, you've told me before how that's, the social media was what enabled then these legal attacks on you, and how the role really that you see Facebook played in that, and has led to the jeopardy which you're still in.
Yeah, I mean, my instinct is to turn it around on Carol, because I feel like you've gotten enough of me. But it is it's the exploitation of what was once advertising and marketing tools. And they didn't actually take into account how information operations can manipulate. And so for me, it was you just wake up to it and then you keep doing your job and you have no choice but to be a punching bag. Carol, turn it around on her. I mean, you were a punching bag, right? And the gendered disinformation, and we talked about this before when you're the reporter and you get pounded, you not only feel the insecurity, but it spreads. Right? Like, how did you handle?
Nice try, Maria.
No, I mean, I'm serious, right?
I'm the moderator here.
No, because you think that in the global south, this stuff happens. Brazil, yes. Patricia Campos Melo, who's also in the audience, right?
Amazing. But can you explain how that actually then translated into legal actions which were taken against you? There was a direct line, wasn't there?
Okay, I better follow the moderator. How does it follow? It's like fertilizer is seeded in information operations. So the meta-narrative was journalist equals criminal. Say the lie a million times, and people who don't know me actually may think I'm a criminal. And then, a year later, it comes from President Duterte. He was then our president himself. He says, Rappler, journalists, Maria Ressa, is a criminal. And when it comes from power, we all know what that is like. When it comes from power, amplified through power, then what does a journalist do? You don't really have a recourse. So I reacted to it like a traditional professional journalist, which is I basically stayed quiet, which is the wrong thing to do if you're under attack. And then I pursued it in court. And in 2018, so you know the impact on a news organization. In January 2018, the government tried to shut us down. Within 4 months, we dropped 49% of our advertising revenue. And it was a war that we would have lost by the end of 2018, but we were forced to find a sustainable business model, and we did it through data and tech. And then 2019, I just kept getting arrested, 10 arrest warrants in less than 2 years. So you kind of have to deal with that. But the other part that's hard is to see your fellow journalists and everyone in your society be afraid, stay quiet. Who are your supporters? Thank you, UNESCO. Thank you. Who are your supporters in something like this? Why did you keep going?
Oh, I don't know.
I try.
You know what? I'm going to go to Felipe next, if I may. So, Felipe, we now know a lot about the role, after the terrible violent insurrection in America in January the 6th, Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook stood up, she was interviewed and she said, oh, Facebook had nothing to do with this. We now know that's not true. We know that the social media platforms played an integral role in inciting that violence. Except, Felipe, can you tell me, you now in Brazil have had a very similar event. Where do you see the sort of role of the platforms in this?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, Maria, I wish I had you in my life before, because everything that I had to face without the professional journalism inside me, it was really hard. In 2021, I had the police come over to my house, and I was being persecuted by the president, and there was an attempt to arrest me because I called him a genocidal, which he is. And it was a really hard battle to have, especially without any kind of information on how to battle this situation. A few months later, they tried to arrest me because of child corruption. I was accused of child corruption, and that is just impossible to give words what it is, to have people go into your house and with a loud car sound system calling me a pedophile to my neighbors and everyone around. It was all over television, and they used these tactics of war and did everything in their power to discredit me and try to silence me. They did this to a lot of people, Patricia Campos Melo, as you mentioned, and it's still going on even though they lost the election. Now they're even angrier and trying everything to silence everyone who has reason, at least a little bit. So I'm sorry if I get a little emotional because it's recent and it's been really hard to fight this. I can't put in words what it is to be called a pedophile. It is just unbearable. I had my followers, though, to fight this, and a lot of people don't. So that's why I created Vero Institute and the institute called Cala a Boca Já Morreu, which in Portuguese means shut up is dead, basically, to defend people who are not in a position of power to defend themselves. So we helped 40 different people that were attacked by the president with the same kind of allegations they did against me. We keep doing this and we will keep fighting even though we won last election. And from the perspective of the digital influence and what happened, what I discovered is even though lies spread much faster than facts, as you said, that this is proven, it's 6 times, even more sometimes, there's one thing we can do. There's one thing that works. And that, I just came across it when in Brazil we have 2 turns, right, of elections. And when we didn't win in the first turn, and we knew we would go to the second turn, I knew it would become a war in digital platforms. They would use every single lie they could possibly use to discredit Lula and try to win this election and turn it around. So I knew I had these followers and I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what, because they would use lies and we only have facts. And what we do is we take the lies and we try to explain with links and fonts, like this is where the truth is, just read it. And that's the boring part. That's where people get, you know, I'm not going to read that. It's not interesting. It's much more entertaining to watch someone from the far right position scream and shout something. So what I did was I used the same technique. I tried to turn information and facts into entertainment. So I did the same kind of strategy, like showing the news reports and everything with fun facts and funny messages. And during that time period, like 28 days, the videos that I made just telling people the lies they were spreading were lies got 300 million views. And that I didn't expect, but it was really important to show that it's possible to turn facts into something interesting and entertaining. Well, we won the election not because of me, of course, but we managed to beat the misinformation and everything that happened in Brazil. But then we had January 8th. That was the insurrection, the terrorist attacks against our institutions, and that was indeed because of how social media is structured today. And if we don't talk about shutting down the factory, as you said brilliantly, we cannot even try to solve this problem. We're still trying to moderate, we're still trying to fix the little things, trying to clean the glasses of water, and we need to talk about the factory. So thank you very much for the opportunity to come here and to give a perspective from the South, from Brazil. And we have a lot of work to do, and I'm really eager to help. Thank you.
Thanks, Felipe. That was very powerful. And as you say, it's a sort of extraordinary thing to have to deal with. So thank you for being here. Melissa, can I ask you a question? What I would like to know is, and I hope this isn't unfair, but you know, as I said, it feels like this amazing thing. We've got the United Nations; they've turned up, hurrah! Like, you know, the big guns have arrived. What happens now to turn? How do we stop this just being a talking shop? And how do we make sure that what goes on in the next 2 days actually is translated into action? And what's the process for that?
Thank you, Carol. But I'd first like to say to Felipe, I think you have more followers combined than all of the UN counts put together. So, I mean, it it is a phenomenon, and it's amazing, but I can imagine also the incredible pressure that you have. And we at least have protectors. Also, there are female UN leaders and spokespeople putting themselves out there, including me, who are subjects to hateful attacks. But I think we're most concerned about, and that is what the UN is for, protecting the most vulnerable people on our earth. And this is where I think finally, I mean, you said the grown-ups started to come into the room in 2016. I think, as you'll see from this conference and many of the discussions that are happening also in the UN Secretariat and in our country offices all over the world, I really think also the UN has finally really woken up to this phenomenon. Sometimes it's very personal. For example, we just surveyed our peacekeepers, and 44% said that misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech on social media is impacting their ability to carry out their job. Their job is to keep the peace. We're seeing, I mean, incredible, things circulating that rile up the public, attacks on peacekeepers. And it's not only peacekeepers, it's our country offices around the world who are working, to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, which is, promoting equality, education, healthcare, climate action. In all of these areas, the facts are being undermined, and public trust is no longer really there. So it's much more difficult for the UN to make the world a better place. So what I'm saying internally, and I think what this conference is doing, Maria calls it our information ecosystem. We need to treat it very much like our environment. We are alarmed when our environment is polluted and when our rivers are full of toxins. We cannot live a healthy human existence. The same goes for information ecosystems. And if our information ecosystems all over the world are out of balance, in places where there's absolutely no moderation from social media platforms, it's even worse. So if we don't focus on this, we're never going to be able to make this world a better place. And finally, in that information ecosystem, the role of the media has to start also being recognized more. Rigorous journalism, the institution of public interest media that has really suffered as social media platforms took over their advertising models. And as you know, independent media are very vulnerable to lawsuits, and imagine in countries where they're extremely exposed. So promote independent media. I know that's very much in UNESCO's mandate as well, but we are really, really seized, and I'm working on leading the process for a code of conduct on information integrity on digital channels, which will also, pull the UN together. We will be very much informed by the outcome of this, and come together in standing up to the platforms, the factories, and at least advocating for fundamental change.
Thank you, Melissa. Maria, you go to an awful lot of conferences, and you talk an awful lot about these issues. Tell me how you see this conference as being different in terms of actually being able to achieve some of the things which we are endlessly talking about. And if there was, if you're trying to get across one thing to this audience, really, what do you want them to take away and to go away and do?
Oh, wow. Okay. So first, UNESCO itself, right? It's freedom of expression. Freedom of expression is under attack, and it's exponential attack. It's speech weaponized. So you have to flip that world. So the mandate of UNESCO is freedom of expression and safety of journalists. Journalists are under attack. And it isn't just us individually. I mean, and again, as the Global North representative in the chilling, you can see it's a psychological attack. It is a personal attack. It is turning your community against you. It is a breakdown of trust. It is insidious. I want to hear more about how you did this. But I would say the last part is that I keep thinking now of how do we deal with this. So I hope you here, please, let us move away from taking the glasses of water, because that is where everything is. And please be aware of, in the US last year, $70 million tech lobby. I sound very radical. I'm not. I'm a traditional broadcast journalist who has just seen the data, knows the tech. I am building tech in Rappler. That's one of the things we're trying to do. So the solutions, I guess that's focus on the solutions, because you can't talk anymore. We've been talking about this since 2016. And then the last part is, in this interim period, while you're debating the legislation, help journalism survive. There's a 10-point action plan that Dmitry Muratov and I released, signed by a dozen Nobel laureates in Oslo last year. And in this one, we look at 3 buckets. The first one is very simple. Stop surveillance for profit. Shoshana Zuboff compares it to the slave trade. I didn't talk about how each of us on every social media platform, they use every atomized post you have is pulled together by machine learning to build a model of you. Replace the word model with clone. So they clone each of us based on our data, then use AI. That is what is used to micro-target. Micro-targeting is very different from advertising. Micro-targeting is insidious manipulation. That is what geopolitical power has weaponized into information warfare. Okay, sorry. So the first, I think, is just, we need to help independent journalism survive, and this is where the International Fund for Public Interest Media. I've been trying to hit all the ones. International Fund for Public Interest Media has, in last year, raised $50 million. That will go to help independent media survive while you're looking at legislation. So rush, because we're under attack, but that now is going out, and the goal there are the democratic countries. Put your money where your mouth is. You've only spent 0.3% of your ODA on independent media. You need us now, and we're under extreme attack. Kick it to 1%, and that will be $1 billion every year for independent media. Sorry, that's the difference.
That's a great ask. I love that. That's something really concrete that people in the audience could actually bring about. Is that what you're saying? They could actually help to save global journalism. That is incredible power that you have, and I think you only have to listen to Maria to understand how acutely the press is under attack and what the consequences are of that. And also just with what Felipe was saying as well. So Felipe, actually, I'm going to go to you now, and what I'm interested in with you as a sort of creator who's making this content for one of these platforms that we're talking about, you're really close to understanding the sort of, you see the algorithm in action, right?
Exactly.
You see the problems, you see the content moderation issues. Can you talk a little bit about that? And also maybe, was there a sort of moment when you got radicalized around this issue?
Yeah, so that point of view is brilliant, and I think the solution, the key is under one word that we need to discuss, and we need to write books about it, to read books about it, and to invest in research about that. We have a lot, but we need more. It is recommendation.
Brazil leads the way in this,
Yes.
right? The clustering algorithms of YouTube in particular.
Exactly. Recommendation is the entire business model of these companies. Is how they profit. And it is, I'm sorry to use this word is very prejudiced, but it is the cancer of the problem. It is the root of the problem is recommendation, because it is hacking our brains to understand what can radicalize us, because they need more minutes from our attention. We are in a war of attention where the companies need to steal attention from each other, and they use any weapon they can to keep us logged in. And in order to make money, they need to go exactly against the public interest. That is to not radicalize opinions, to not push us towards this craziness that is not crazy, but it sounds crazy. So we need to discuss the methods. We need to ask for transparency. I know we talk about transparency a lot, but how do they do recommendation system? They don't tell us.
Felipe,
ever.
Can I ask, have you asked that question of YouTube, and what do they tell you?
Nothing.
And what sort of thing? So tell me, do you have examples where your videos, after your videos, people are being recommended sort of far-right, violent, whatever extremist content?
Yeah, so
you're feeding that in that sense?
I make money from recommendation. 70% of my views on YouTube, and I have over 17 billion views on YouTube. 70% of that comes from recommendation. So the entire environment is around recommendation system, and we need to understand how it works in order to prevent radical videos and extremists and etc. And I ask YouTube for 13 years. I've been asking them how does it work? How can I push forward? How can I be more when I wasn't really aware of this being a problem? I was asking, how can I get more recommendations? Now I need to understand how it works, and they don't tell you. They will never tell us unless we make them tell us, maybe.
And can I say, I mean, I think this is a real issue, because at conferences like this, we will have people come from the platforms, from Google and Facebook. Google has sent their head of human rights here, who will speak about the company's interests, genuine interest in human rights. But yet, if we're not addressing things like this, those words are meaningless. And I think that you've got to hold that very, their head of recommendation is not here. We're not able to ask them questions. Nobody's able to ask them questions, are they?
No, they don't answer to these questions. And what I did was try to hack their own system. So every time I saw, like I said, there's 300 million views. Every time I saw a lie, I used the same keywords to get recommended into the extremists, right? So when people would watch the extremist videos, I would get recommended. So I used the same target audience to try to hack that system and get inside and talk to people like, this is a lie, and in a funny way give the message. But it's so hard. It is so hard. Sometimes I would get inside the video of a radicalized person and I wouldn't find any counterpoint, any whatsoever, just things that push you forward into that point of view. And we really need to ask these companies, what are you doing, and how can you sleep at night? How can you say you're worried about human rights when you literally use radicalization for profit? This cannot stand. We need to fight radicalization for profit.
I want to annotate him and give you a link. So the study that did this in Brazil, it started with Zika and then looked at how the far right and the conspiracy theorists in network clustering algorithms, people who would never have met each other in the real world, will pulled together by these clustering algorithms. The video was recommended. This essentially brought Bolsonaro to the presidency, right? So the guy, Google, Jonas Kaiser, this is the study that he did. There's a paper there, but you will also see several things. Zika was one. So it's incredible that you spend time to look at how you get recommended into that ecosystem. But this is what they expect journalists to do, and we don't do that.
Exactly. It's impossible to ask for journalists and academics to invest in this. What we need maybe do before they change this, we hope, we need, and this I would like to ask UNESCO, we need to bring more influencers to the table. I know it sounds kind of silly, but we need to talk to influencers, because I had a life of my father is a psychologist, my mother works with education, so I had this life where I got interested in books. But we have a lot of influencers who don't. They have no idea what we're discussing here. They're just making funny videos, and they can make a difference. They can help us if we talk to them. So I urge UNESCO, talk to influencers. They really can help, and they want to help. They just don't know how.
But in the Philippines, these influencers were weaponized to attack journalists.
Oh, yeah.
So you grew from gaming, right? Like, is that where you came
sometimes,
from?
yeah.
Lots of
I also do
things?
gaming, yes.
Yeah. So that's the problem. You are, in some ways, I mean, there are more people like you, but what do we do when they're used to attack?
Exactly. We need to bring us to our side. We need to talk to them. They will listen if we talk to them, but they have no one talking to them right now. The people are just expecting from each other. We need to stop expecting and start talking and start asking and start inspiring. We can inspire people, especially the influencers. They can come to our side.
Maybe if I can add there, as somebody who runs the UN social media accounts and a campaign called Verified that we tested also in Brazil during the pandemic, which really was to mobilize influencers, because it was very clear that we were not going to reach people broadcasting from UN headquarters in New York, and that the only way in this system, also of recommendations, in a system where the United Nations on Facebook, for example, is classified as a civic institution, which means our starting point is downranked. We are downranked. We've never been able to get that changed, even though we do really think we are the source of trusted information science.
Lisa, can you just explain that a bit more? You're saying that the United Nations on Facebook is downranked as a source of authoritative information. You're kidding. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's true.
And what?
Well, they're not calling people communists. That's what people want to watch.
So we're in this constant battle. I mean, this was particularly after 2018, where we kind of went into this category with other news organizations, but given ad credits to try to then lift that post to the level of the Joe conspiracy theory post so that we can compete. So what we have tried to do, what we have done, I think, successfully, is that we have gone to influencers. I mean, beyond our usual celebrity influencers, who do make a huge gazillions, like Leo DiCaprio on climate, massive. He takes our messaging, he, delivers them to his fans. But what we found during COVID-19, which was even more effective, was to use micro-influencers, people in the communities who spoke languages, who had cultural relevance, in places also where social media platforms have no cultural knowledge and have no language moderators. But to mobilize those forces for good, because what we did find is that if we created content that was engaging, that traveled well on social media, that was based on facts, boring facts, yes, but made into entertaining, and gave them to people who already had big followings, because there are so many who want to, spread the truth and to have a positive impact on communities. So
write my number. Let's discuss after this. I'm
Please join forces with us.
I'm 100% available to help. I really want to help you build this. I really do.
I can't get my head around this absurdity that the United Nations is having to compete on Facebook against conspiracy theorists, and that the marketplace is treating these as equal. I mean, well, I mean, in terms of a starting point for this conference, that has to be it, right? You're the United Nations. You shouldn't be competing against conspiracy theorists to get attention to what you're actually doing here online. And there are people from these platforms here, and these are the questions which need to be asked over the next 2 days. And you need to get answers, I think. And if these aren't the right people here, then we have to find a way of you bringing those people, I think. I see Maria nodding. What are you going to say, Maria?
No, I think you need to move beyond the false equivalence. So when I was first being attacked and I went to Facebook, and Facebook said, but you're a public figure. Like, that's normal. That's not normal. I think we have to go beyond that this is human nature. It isn't human nature. There's a system, rule of law. And that system has been undermined. Look, we sound like we're against tech. I love tech. I mean, it is critical. We cannot put the genie back in the bottle, but what we do need are guardrails to protect citizens, to protect consumers. It's like a better business bureau. What Felipe was describing is like that Facts First PH pyramid is essentially an influencer marketing campaign for facts. But why do we have to do that? Why does, this is the public good. This is the public sphere. And you need to protect that. And, I guess the difference is, I'll pull it back to something that's very familiar to all of us. When you run a news organization, there's the news organization's own need for money, and then there's the editor, the editor and the journalist, right? Oftentimes they clash. And a good news organization still does the story. I mean, I took the risk to go to jail, because I think it's protecting the public sphere. So if you're going to be the gatekeeper, dear tech people, then you have responsibilities. And you in the room must demand that happen, that there be accountability. Impunity must stop.
I want to go to that, actually, Melissa, with that question, which is, I really appreciated what you said about UNESCO's, the focus on the victims. And that, I think, just has to be front and center in everything that is, we're talking about in this conference. And I think particularly about what happened in Myanmar. And so few people actually understand that that's the genocide in Myanmar. The United Nations did a report, and they found that Facebook played a determining role in that, in the murder of tens of thousands of people, and what they said was a textbook case of ethnic cleansing. And the key thing about that report is that it had no consequences. Nobody was held to account, and there has been absolute impunity. And there has been no justice and no answers even for the Rohingya who have been trying to advocate for that. Tell me, it feels, I do feel this gets forgotten, and that we don't we haven't faced up to what that is and read the warning signs there. What role does the United Nations have, Melissa, in ensuring that something like that doesn't happen again, although it already has?
Thanks, Carol, for bringing up Myanmar, because I think it is, one of the most horrific examples of the consequence of, there was this, the UN is trying to connect everybody. We heard here, we'd love everybody to have the right to be connected to the internet, but Myanmar was very, very disconnected, and Facebook had this, dream to go in and give everybody the chance to be online, but only under one condition, that you access online through the Facebook app. And so we're giving them the tools without protecting them against the dangers, and people who have, really no experience in navigating. And what they were getting in their feeds was hate, was dehumanizing language, was the language that, it gave license to kill, license to rape, license to throw babies in fires, license to drive. And so have we learned? It's really hard until Max Fisher just wrote a book, The Chaos Machine, and has really has written in detail, because our report was detailed, but the detail here, I think everybody should read what happened, and this should raise alarm bells. What can be done to prevent? Have we seen change? Have we seen more human moderation? Have we seen people who can speak languages? Have we seen more curation, and let's not march into countries and connect people to understand what a fragile environment this is, and the ethnic hatreds and issues and the turning point. But this isn't, unfortunately, being done.
Thanks, Melissa. Felipe, I wanted to ask you, I mean, essentially you're living the dream. You are the person who kids all over the world dream about becoming, this influencer with an enormous platform, enormous power. You know, I'm sure it's a great living also. And you wouldn't have had access to speak in this way to this audience without these tools. And so you're an example of like how this connected world does create opportunities for voices which wouldn't have been heard. My question is it worth it, do you think? Well, now you also understand the harms of it. Where do you fall on that line?
Well, absolutely. I don't want to sound ungrateful. Like, everything that I accomplished in my professional life, it was because of YouTube. It was because of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Of course, we don't want to shut down the platforms. We don't want to fight them in a level of creating a war. It's not about that. It's about accountability. It's about stopping, what's the word you said, impunity. It's stopping impunity. It's bringing them to the table and saying you need to be a part of the discussion, but you also need to be responsible for the mistakes that you made and you will make. That's the starting point. So I think I would do it all over again, even the mistakes that I made. But I was basically in 2015, I discovered that I had a huge child audience, for example. And I didn't know that before because YouTube was a platform for over 13. So what I did when I discovered that is I changed everything that I did. I used bad words. I used to talk about sex. I stopped. I realigned my speech and I started changing everything that I did. And I started to study how to talk to children, like the responsibilities that you have when you have children watching you. What I think that is happening is these platforms, every day they discover a new thing that they need to be responsible for, and they just keep waiting for something to happen. Yeah. They keep asking for something to happen, like regulate us. Stop saying regulate us, come to the table and take accountability for what you're doing. Stop just asking for people to solve your problems.
Problems you created.
Yeah, the problems you created. So we want to help. But we don't want to be in that position that you're putting us. So I think I would do it all over again. They shouldn't.
Thanks, Felipe. We have 55 seconds left. Maria, can I just take final thoughts, I suppose, from the panel? What do you want to leave the audience with?
In the short term, the tech companies have the ability to lead to a better place. They just have to moderate their greed and act like leaders instead of the 3Ds, deny, deflect. So do it, please. That's the first. And then for all of us, it's time to stop talking. The evidence is there. The impact on all of us, there are 10,000 plus internal documents that were released by Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, but it isn't just Facebook, right? You heard YouTube, Twitter, of course we all know. You know, this is what is connecting us, and it is harming us. The toxic sludge is pushing the worst of humanity. That has to stop.
Thanks, Maria. One sentence, Melissa.
I agree. I don't think it is a reflection of our true society, but it is dividing our societies and causing enormous harm. And it has the potential to do so much good, to have voices amplified like Felipe and facts and science that would dominate our discourse and promote human trust. So I think, you know, the platforms say that they want this. And let's all work together and make an information ecosystem that is healthy, where people can thrive and human rights can be at the center.
Felipe, one sentence.
Stop hurting children, please.
Thank you. And I think on that we will wrap up there. Thank you ever so much. Thank you, UNESCO, for having us.
That was chilling, powerful and thought-provoking. I don't know about you, but at times the hair on the back of my neck was standing up on end, but also a very practical panel. And I applaud Maria, Melissa, Felipe, and Carol. And again, the importance of this panel underlines how critical this UNESCO-led consultation is. I encourage everyone to join the conversation using the hashtag #InternetForTrust. Now, time to give you a bit of information about how the discussions are going to take place over the next 2 days. And there's quite a lot of information to take in here. All of you should have received the participation principles. So please read this document carefully as it will guide our discussions for the next 2 days. We ask all the participants to commit to principles of inclusion, equality, mutual respect and sincerity. Now, UNESCO wants everyone to be able to participate in this consultation. That's why we set up a digital engagement tool for you to contribute. Now, a QR code and link will be posted on the screen to access the consultation questions for each session. Participants are invited to submit their comments via the digital engagement tool. The results are going to be carefully reviewed by the UNESCO team in real time, and a selection of comments will be read aloud during the conference. All comments received that conform to the participation guidelines may be shared publicly as part of that consultation process. Now, in order to ensure a multi-stakeholder participation in each of the consultation sessions, the moderator will call for participation from the various stakeholder groups represented in the audience, and that's going to be in person and remotely. Now listen in, because these are the groups, and they're divided as follows. Group 1, there is the public sector, and that's executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government, regulatory bodies, and state entities. Group 2, private sector, that's companies, industry representatives. Group 3, civil society and media. Group 4, that is academic and technical community. Group 5, intergovernmental organizations. In each session, following the panelists' opening remarks, in-person and online audience participants will be invited to respond to questions related to the session, followed by an open invitation to additional perspectives that are missing. Now, for in-person participation, individuals who wish to speak when their stakeholder group is called by the moderator have to raise their hand. The moderator will then choose from different parts of the room, and the microphone will be handed out to you via the ushers. Once the speaker has finished speaking, the moderator will call on the next group. Each in-person participant called upon to intervene will have 2 minutes. 2 minutes to speak. The room is equipped with timers that will allow speakers on stage and in the audience to keep track of that time, and that's really important. At 1 minute 30 seconds, there's going to be an alert jingle. That allows you to know that it's time to start rapping, and at 2 minutes, the microphone will be disabled. It's important that the speakers in the room use the microphone with enough distance from the mouth to allow for simultaneous interpretation. Participants in the remote audience will follow the conference through Zoom. The live stream will also be broadcast online. Microphones and chat functions are disabled. The digital engagement tool will be the primary channel for interaction. And now I'll remind you of this one more time too. Please do not forget to visit the digital tool through the link and using the QR code displayed on the screen and on social media, once again using those hashtags #InternetForTrust and Reboot the Net. #InternetForTrust and Reboot the Net. Now, the objective of the next session is to discuss the key regulatory elements that are necessary to ensure freedom of expression and access information while addressing illegal and potentially harmful content. Now, please join me in welcoming our moderator, and our moderator is Patricia Campos Melo, and the speakers for this discussion to the stage.
Well, good morning, everyone. Such an amazing panel. Before, it's very tough act to follow. I would like to start by thanking UNESCO for hosting this incredibly important event. And this is the first session that's going to be discussing the guidelines and in a more general view, it's called Supporting an Internet for Trust. I'm going to introduce our distinguished panelists. Helani Galpaya, please correct me if I mispronounce your names, please. Helani Galpaya, Chief Executive Officer, Learn Asia from Sri Lanka. Nizar Yaish, Global Digital Leader for Government and Public Services, PwC, and former Minister of Finance of Tunisia. Pansi Tlakula, Chairperson of the Information Regulator in South Africa. Christophe Deloire, Chair of the Forum on Information and Democracy, Secretary General of Reporters Without Borders. And finally, Chris Sharrock, Vice President, UN Affairs and International Organizations, Microsoft. Well, thank you all for being here. The idea of this panel is actually to have an interactive section. So listening from the panelists here and from the audience and from online. And I'm just gonna kick off with the questions, same questions for each of you. Each of you is gonna have 5 minutes to speak. And it's a very difficult question, so I know 5 minutes is not going to be enough. But I would like to hear your thoughts on how we could balance having an internet that combines freedom of expression while it guarantees the safety of users and the respect for democracy and human rights. See, very easy question. So let's start with Christophe.
Hi. Do you allow me to speak in French to secure pluralism of the languages in this debate?
Sure, you can speak in French. Unfortunately, I don't speak French, and it's a shame. I will use
there is an interpretation, I think.
Yes, you should be hearing the English on this channel. Now, we often ask this question from a stance of contradiction, as if there was some contradiction between freedom of expression and users' rights. But the question I ask is raising these issues of principles with the corporations that decide what we can see or not with their recommendation algorithms. Is that an attack on freedom of expression? Having principles to avoid the sort of hateful attack we heard about earlier, is that attacking freedom of expression? Avoiding the fact that, Tim George and the information industry can create avatars, whether it be about journalists or other citizens, and disseminate that. Is that in contradiction with freedom of expression? So insisting on transparency about the codes, which is now, according to law in digital spaces, is all of that attacking freedom of speech? And what about the arbitrary withdrawal or suspension of accounts on social media or their re-inclusion? Now, how that whole thing is managed, we need to see whether that is a contradiction or not. There are two sides to freedom of expression. One is telling the difference between what's licit and what's illicit. And when it comes to the guidelines, it's very important that what is legal and licit be compliant with international law, that's to say restricted. And any vision aimed at broadening that would be dangerous. However, that doesn't mean you can't address issues relating to content on sites. No spreading rumors or just your own opinions, sometimes lying, except when it comes to certain economic issues, say doing the opposite of quality journalism, publicizing things, advertising things, disseminating political releases, that's licit. But if you turn to advertising and restrictions, is that restricting freedom of expression? No, I think it's perfectly right to regulate what's legal and licit because no one will feel that all these regulations applying to editorialism is attacking freedom of expression. But freedom of opinion, and that's completely different from freedom of expression. That is something that we all have. The freedom of opinion is something that is valid for the people receiving the information. With this explosive development of communication, we have to strike the balance between those who speakers, and those who receive the information, the audience or audiences. Because if you spread fake information, if you try to manipulate things, then you're affecting my right to health and other life rights. And in fact, in the Partnership for Information and Democracy, involving now 50 states, it was very clear that access to reliable information has to be protected to protect democracy and freedom of expression. And these 50 states have produced a commitment, delivered a commitment to positive guarantees. For example, states insist that digital platforms promote tools that will enhance visibility and transparency of reliable information. But the question is, what type of regulation will enhance freedom of expression? Obviously, it has to be based on doing your best efforts, coming up with the best ways of ensuring independent and pluralist expressions, as opposed to corrupted information or information that is actually driven by anonymous actors. That is what will promote freedom of expression for me.
Thank you so much, Christophe. Now I would like to pose the same question for Helani. Helani, what are your views in terms of what kind of approaches should we have for achieving this balance?
Thanks, Patricia. I know we will talk a lot about platforms. They do need to be held into account. So let me focus on governments who also need to be held into account. While I agree with all the problems with platforms, governments are also sort of this big monolith in the room. First is the thread of data, as Maria talked about. The viral content that is spread through algorithms needs to be countered by facts and counter speech that also goes viral and fact-checked through a combination of algorithms and humans. And the problem is, in many of the developing countries, and we work in my team with natural language processing algorithms, we don't have the facts to fact checks against. The governments are not committed to simple open data principles, so something as simple as a price basket calculation and the weights to calculate inflation is not available in many countries. So I'm not even talking about conspiracy theories. Basic government facts are not online. That's a problem, and the right to information is not a counter to that. That's a very individualistic one-off stream of information that journalists and individuals can use. We need data at scale. So that's a real problem, and governments need to take that commitment. Otherwise, we will not be able to counter this at scale and use algorithms as the first step of moderating content. The second is this conflict of the government as the regulator who's supposed to enforce some of these regulations or guidelines, but also needing to be a regulated entity because the government is also part of the problem here. So last year, my organization and 5 other organizations did the largest scoping study of disinformation in the Global South. And we looked at 28 countries in Asia. In most of the countries, government is a big part of the creation and dissemination of false narratives through government and politically funded organizations like the IT cells in India, troll factories in the Philippines, buzzers in Indonesia, cyber troops in Myanmar, Cyber Sena in Nepal. So you need to figure out a way when you are part of the content creation problem, but you're also now expected to be the regulator, right? And another part of this is the use of existing laws and constitutional bending to regulate activities and to criminalize this, right? Even the new telecom bill in India has vague definitions of what comes under, so clearly social media will, and has sections devoted to national security, public emergency, and public safety. So this cloaking and labeling under national security means nobody can question it. It puts the stamp of this is important to the nation, right? And this creates real problems, and India just needs to look at its neighbors in South Asia, where women are put in